today's classic fairy tales, The Sleeping Beauty. Once upon a time, there lived a king and a queen who had everything life had to offer except a child. How fervently they wished for a baby to grace their lives. Then and only then, they knew, would true happiness come. Imagine their rejoicing when, at long last, the queen gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. The whole kingdom celebrated. The great christening ceremony was held. The king and queen invited all the fairies they could find in the land, there were 7 of them, to be godmothers for the princess. It was the custom of the fairies at the time to give special talents or virtues to their godchildren. The king and queen hoped that, with the gifts of the 7 godmothers, the princess would have all the perfections one could imagine. After the christening, everyone returned to the palace. There was a banquet had been prepared in the honor of the fairies. At each fairy's place setting was a small box of solid gold. Inside were a fork, a spoon, and a knife made of gold and set with diamonds and rubies. No sooner were they all seated than a very old fairy in the room. No one had thought of inviting her because for 50 years she had not left her tower. Everyone believed that she was dead or under a spell. At once the king ordered that a place be set for her at the table, but it was not possible to set out for her a solid gold box as the other 7 fairies had been given. Only 7 boxes had been made. The old fairy was greatly offended and began to mutter threats through clenched teeth. A younger fairy sitting nearby overheard her. Fearing that the old fairy might give the princess an evil gift, the young fairy quickly hid behind the curtain. She wanted to be the last to grant her gift, so that she might undo some of the harm that the old fairy surely planned. The youngest fairy was to give her gift first. She announced that the princess would be the most beautiful woman in the land. The second gave her a spirit as pure as a lamb. The third made her graceful. The fourth gave her the gift of dancing, and the fifth the singing of like a nightingale. The sixth gave her the ability to play any instrument. Then came the old fairy's turn. Shaking from spite, she promised that the princess would prick her finger on a spindle, the wooden rod used in a spinning to twist the thread. Then the princess would die. Everyone shuddered. But at the moment, the young fairy came from behind the curtain. In a clear, strong voice, she said, "Take heart, good king and queen, for your daughter will not die. Unhappily, I do not have the power to undo completely this evil spell that has been cast. Yes, the princess will prick her finger with the spindle, but instead of dying, she will merely fall into a deep sleep lasting 100 years. At the end of that time, a prince will awaken her." The king tried to prevent the disaster predicted by the old fairy. He immediately passed the law forbidding the use of spindles or owning of spindles. 16 years passed. One day, when the king and queen had gone out to one of their country homes, the young princess went wandering through the castle. She came at last to a tiny attic room at the top of the tower. There, a skillful old woman sat spinning. The old woman rarely left her room and knew nothing about the laws against spindles. "What are you doing, good woman?" asked the princess. "I'm spinning, lovely child," replied the woman, who did not know the princess. "Oh, how clever," said the princess. "Let me try. I want to see if I could do it." Perhaps what happened next happened because the princess was excited and a little confused. Perhaps it happened because of the old fairy's prophecy. But no sooner had the princess picked up the spindle than she pricked her finger. At once she fell unconscious. The old woman, in panic, called for help. People rushed in from all over the palace. They poured water over the princess's face, loosened her gown, slapped her hands, and even rubbed her temples with perfume. But nothing would awaken her. In the middle of the confusion, the king and queen had returned. They recalled the fairy's predictions and realized that this event were bound to happen. They had the princess carried to the finest apartment in the palace. She was laid upon a bed with covers embroidered in gold and silver. The princess had looked like a sleeping angel. Her enchanted sleep had not dimmed her natural color. Her cheeks were pink, and her shiny lips were as red as coral. Her eyes were closed, but her steady breathing proved that she was alive. The king had ordered that she be left to sleep. When the accident befell the princess, the good fairy who had traded her death for 100 years' sleep was 12,000 leagues away. A dwarf wearing 7-leagued boots sped to her side to tell the news. Such boots enabled the wearer to cover 7 leagues with every step. The fairy immediately set off in her fiery chariot drawn by dragons. Within an hour she arrived at the palace. The king himself helped her from the carriage and took her to view the sleeping princess. The fairy approved of all that the king had done. Still, being more farsighted than others, she realized that when the princess awoke, the girl would feel lost if she were alone in that old castle. So with her magic wand, the fairy touched everyone and everything in the castle except for the king and queen. She touched officials, ladies in waiting, waiters, gentlemen, coachmen, scullery maids, field hands, guards, pages, and messenger boys. She touched the horses in the stable, the grooms, and the great guard dogs. She even touched little Piff, who was the princess's pet dog who lay near her bed. The instant that she touched them, they fell asleep, not to be awakened until their young mistress awoke and needed them once more. All was still. Even the spits over the fire, full of partridges and pheasants, fell asleep, as did the fire itself. These events happened in an instant. Fairies work quickly. Then the king and queen kissed their daughter goodbye and left for the castle. They decreed that no one was allowed to enter the castle. The decree, however, was not needed, for within a quarter of an hour, all about the castle grounds there sprang up trees, bushes, and prickly brambles. The forest was so thick that neither animal nor human could pass through. The only parts of the castle that could be seen were the turrets on the top of the towers. Even those could be seen only from far off. The fairy did this so that nothing would disturb the sleeping princess. 100 years passed. The kingdom was now under the rule of a family different from the princess. The son of the present king, who was hunting not far from where the princess had slept. He saw castle towers rising above the forest and asked what they were. Each of his men told the prince a different story, according to what they had heard. Some of them said it was an old haunted castle. Others said that the witches of the land held their magic ceremonies there. The most common opinion was that an ogre lived there, and that he carried the children that he managed to catch. The prince did not know what to believe. Finally, an old peasant spoke up. "My good prince, over 50 years ago, my father told me that in that castle is the most beautiful princess in the world. She must sleep for 100 years. At the end of that time, she'll be awakened by the son of the king. It is destined that they'll be married." Those words lit a fire in the prince's heart. He was sure that it fell to him to carry out this great adventure. Driven by the desire for love and glory, he decided in that instant to see the mysterious castle. As soon as he drew near, the forest, the trees, the bushes, and prickly brambles all moved aside to let him pass. He went straight toward the castle and saw at the end of the great avenue. With surprise, he realized that not one of his servants were able to follow him, for the forest had closed again as soon as he passed. There was nothing, however, that could stop a young prince in love. He came into a vast courtyard, and what a terrible silence there was. All around lay lifeless bodies of people and animals, but the prince noticed the rosy cheeks of the guards around the gates. He realized they were only asleep. The prince walked through a great hall paved in marble, climbed a grand staircase, and entered the guard room. The guards still stood in line, their pikes on their shoulders, all snoring loudly. The prince passed on through several rooms full of lords and ladies, some standing, some sitting, all asleep. Finally, he came to a gilded room and found lying in the bed the most beautiful vision he had ever seen. It was the young princess, so radiantly beautiful that she looked like almost a goddess. Trembling, the prince approached her. He fell to her knees beside her, admiring her. At that moment, the spell was broken, and the princess awoke. She looked at the prince with a tenderness, and he returned her gaze with a smile. "Is it you, my lord?" she asked. "I've waited all this long for you." The prince was enchanted by these words, and still more by the way they were said. He hardly knew how to show his own joy and gratitude. In simple words, he assured her that he loved her more than his own life. He didn't speak elegantly, but this made his words even more pleasing to the princess. The prince was more ill at ease than she was, which was not surprising considering that she had such a long time to dream about what speech to say to him. For 4 hours they talked together, but still they told each other only half what they had to say. Meanwhile, the palace had begun to awaken with the princess. Each person had begun to at once carry on with his or her work. Now, since all of them were in love, most of them were dying of hunger. A lady in waiting, hungry like the others, grew impatient and told the princess that dinner was served. The prince helped the princess get up. She was already dressed magnificently. The prince guarded against telling her that her clothes were in style his grandmother might have worn. This didn't make her any less pretty. Together they entered the halls of mirrors and dined there, served by the princess's personal staff. Violins and oboes played old-fashioned melodies that had not been heard for 100 years. After dinner, the prince and princess wasted no time and were married by the court chaplain. Early the next morning, the prince returned to his own city, knowing that his father would be anxious for the news of him. He told his father that he had become that he had become lost while hunting in the forest. His father, the king, believed his son. His mother, however, was not convinced. She saw that he went out hunting each day and always had an excuse for staying away all night. She realized that he had fallen in love and was not happy about it at all. In fact, the prince had lived with his princess in the matter of 2 whole years, and they had 2 children. The first was a daughter named Aurora, which meant dawn. The second was a boy named Sunshine, who looked even more pleasing than his sister. To make her son confide in her, the queen often told him that he should marry, but the prince still kept his secret from her. Although he loved his mother, he didn't trust her because she came from a family of wealthy ogres. His father had married her for the money. It was whispered about at court that she had an ogre's wicked nature and that when she saw children passing by, she longed to pounce on them. 2 years later, when his father died, the prince became ruler of the kingdom. Then he publicly proclaimed his marriage. With great pomp, the new king brought his happy family to the kingdom. A short time later, the king had to go away to war against the neighboring emperor, and it seemed that he would be away all summer. He left the management of the kingdom to his mother, the queen, urging her strongly to take care of his wife and children. As soon as he left, the queen mother sent her daughter-in-law and grandchildren to a country house in the forest. There she planned to act upon her horrible longings. A few days later, she joined them. That very evening, she told the chief steward, "Tomorrow at dinner I shall eat little Aurora." "Surely not, your majesty," he protested. "I command it," growled the queen, and prepared a rich sauce for her. The poor man knew that no one should ever have to play games with an ogre, so with his knife he went to little Aurora's bedchamber. The girl was 4 years old at the time, and she rushed up to him smiling and threw her arms around his neck. The steward began to weep, and the knife fell from his hand. Then he dashed into the yard and killed a lamb. He had it cooked in such a wonderful sauce that even the queen mother claimed that she never had eaten anything so delicious. In the meantime, he took the little Aurora away from him and his wife, hid her and hid them in a cottage at the end of the courtyard. 8 days later, the evil queen mother announced to the steward, "For supper, I wish to eat Sunshine." The man decided to deceive the queen mother as he had before. He found a 3-year-old Sunshine with a tiny sword in his hand, fencing with a monkey. The clever man took Sunshine to his wife, who hid him along with Aurora. In the boy's place, the steward cooked a young goat. The queen mother pronounced it delicious. So far had gone well, but then one evening the wicked queen mother said to the chief steward, "I want to eat the queen herself." The chief steward had no hope of tricking the ogress this time. To save his own life, he decided that he had no choice but to do as she commanded. He worked himself up to a rage and then went to the young queen's chamber, his mind set. Still, he didn't want to strike her without a warning. With great respect, he told her of the queen mother's command. "Do your duty," said the young queen bravely. "Carry out all the orders that you have received. At least I will be now reunited with my beloved children." She believed them dead, for she knew nothing of them since they had been taken from her. "No, no, your majesty," cried the steward, his heart softening. "You will not die, and you will see your children again. I have them hidden away in my cottage. I will trick the queen mother once more, and give her the young deer to eat in place of you." He led the queen to his cottage, where he left her in tears in arms of her children. Then he cooked a young deer, which the wicked ogress ate greedily. She was quite pleased with her cruelty. She decided to tell her son, upon his return, that savage wolves had devoured his wife and children. One evening, the queen mother wandered about the castle courtyards alone. From a distance, she heard little Sunshine speaking to his mother. She also heard little Aurora. The ogress recognized the voices of the queen and her children, and she grew furious that she had been tricked. The next morning, in a voice so frightening that all who heard her trembled, she ordered a huge tub to be placed in the middle of the courtyard. She commanded that it be filled with all sorts of horrid creatures, toads, poisonous vipers, slugs, and serpents. Her intention was to throw the queen, her 2 children, the chief steward, his wife, and the servant girl into the tub. When all was ready, she ordered that the victims be brought before her. There they were, and the executioners were preparing to throw them into the tub. Suddenly the king, arriving quite unexpectedly, rode into the courtyard. Astonished, he demanded to know the meaning of this horrible spectacle. The ogress was enraged to see the king arrived. She threw herself into the tub head first, and in an instant she was devoured by the beasts that she herself had brought together. Horrified, the king listened to the tale of what happened in his absence. Then he drew his lovely wife and sweet children to him, and they lived happily together in love and happiness from that day forward. That end.